Let's talk about the history and implications of apostolic appointments within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Currently, the LDS community is waiting for the LDS President Dallin H to appoint a new apostle, following the president of the Quorum of the 12, Jeffrey R. Holland, passing away a few weeks ago. It will be Oak's second appointment to the Quorum of the 12 since his ascension to the presidency last fall. He chose Gerald Cosset from November, who I'll talk a little bit more about later, and it's possible by the time you watch this video, he will have already made his decision and announcement. It's also possible that they're going to wait until the April General Conference. Sometimes they do the one option, sometimes they do the other. These choices of who will fill a vacancy within the Quorum of the 12 are among the most consequential decisions that church presidents make. In the short term, those decisions help comprise one of the governing bodies that make some of the most important choices and oversee the missions of the church for the entire institution. And in the long term, those appointed to the Quorum of the 12 are set up to influence the church for several decades. Now, I recently, a few weeks ago, joined the Salt Lake Tribune's wonderful Mormon Land podcast to talk about these apostolic appointments. So, while I recommend going to check out that interview if you haven't yet, I thought I would distill some of the major lessons and expound on others on why these apostolic appointments are so significant and referencing some historical development. So in this video, I'll talk about the origins of this Quorum of the 12 as a governing body and how they evolved in power and authority within the tradition. I'll explore some of the familial politics at play, especially during the second generation of the church when many were selected from apostolic families. I'll then survey how these appointments have evolved in the last century, and I'll conclude by touching on some of the issues that are likely at play while Dallin H. Oaks is considering who to make with his selection. In the Mormon tradition's earliest years, Joseph Smith's first revelation spoke about calling a set of apostles or disciples. This was part of a primitivist impulse in early Mormonism, a belief of trying to connect the modern church to the ancient church, and because the ancient church was apostolic with Peter, James, and John, and the rest of the disciples that Jesus called, Joseph Smith proclaimed that we need a modern quorum of the 12 apostles. Some historians, like D. Michael Quinn, in his Mormon Hierarchy volume, argue that there was actually an original Quorum of the 12 called around 1830, though I think the evidence for that is quite scant. The first Quorum of the 12 on record was called on February 14th, 1835. They were all, or most of them, veterans of Zion's Camp, a quasi-military march that Joe Smith had led out to Missouri to try to redeem the church's loss of Jackson County. Seniority within the Quorum of the 12 was determined according to age, which I see as a check on the democratic impulses of early America that we are going to return to some form of order and authority and hierarchy in a world that seemed to be spinning out of control. Now, here you see some images that the Salt Lake Tribune put together on a story a while ago about the photographs we have of those original members of the Quorum of 12. You'll note we don't have photographs of, that was just the era. And you also note that many of those Quorum of the 12 do not remain within the church, which I'll get to in a minute. At first, this Quorum of the 12 was seen as a traveling body. Joseph Smith had established two functions of oversight, that at the church headquarters, there would be bishops and eventually stakes who would oversee the local congregations, Zion, and then abroad, there would be the Quorum of the 12 overseeing missionary work, which meant those people who were called to that original Quorum of the 12 were largely missionaries. They were constantly on the road. Now, several of them, including the president, Thomas Marsh, would eventually leave the church over disputes with Joseph Smith, both in Kirtland, Missouri, and then eventually in Nauvoo. And it's in Nauvoo when the Quorum of the 12 fundamentally change with regard to their authority within the church. They had arranged the church's out-migration out of Missouri in 1838, 1839, in the wake of the Mormon-Missouri War. They had also gone on a very successful missionary trip to England where they brought in thousands of converts, which that infusion of new bodies ended up saving the church at a moment of peril. And so starting in 1841, Joseph Smith publicly promotes the Quorum of the 12, saying that they are now taking their place within church church leadership, and they would have authority at home, not just abroad. So from that point on, members of the Quorum of the 12 would take foundational leadership duties like finances, control over Joseph Smith's documents. They also took a more prominent role over leadership, and importantly, they were invited into Joseph Smith's clandestine experiment into polygamy. So by the time that Joseph Smith dies in the summer of 1844, the Quorum of the 12 were a formidable body, which allowed Brigham Young to then argue for the Quorum of the 12's ascension to church leadership, saying that the Quorum of the 12 had the authority that Joseph Smith had placed on them. I did an entire video on the succession crisis. I recommend going back to watch this, and how there are a variety of different potential succession options, Quorum of the 12 being one of them, and Brigham Young, due to his charisma, due to his claims of legal jiu-jitsu. Watch my interview with Nathan Oman this Friday if you want more on that. Brigham Young is able to move the Quorum of the 12 into church leadership, and then within a few years, by late 1847, he himself ascends to the presidency above the Quorum of the 12 and reestablishes the Quorum of the 12 as an existing body with the First Presidency above it. And Brigham Young's ascension then establishes within the LDS tradition the Quorum of the 12's supremacy within church matters, with only the First Presidency above them. They also evolve in terms of who is senior within the Quorum of the 12. That original Quorum of the 12, their seniority was dictated according to age. Now seniority in the Quorum of the 12 is going to be dictated according to ordination date, though even that is going to shift a little bit going forward. Before I go further, just a reminder that if you enjoyed this type of nerdy content, please make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Every Monday, I do deep dives on particular topics. Wednesdays, I connect the past to the present, trying to give background to contemporary concerns and issues in politics and media. And then on Friday, I pull back the curtain to talk about the historian's craft, including author interviews. I also recommend marking your calendars for next Wednesday, February 4th at 7 p.m. I will be doing my monthly live Zoom discussion at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And because I did a whole series on D&C 132 with the third part coming this next Monday, and because I also did a video on the John Taylor revelation, our theme for this monthly live discussion next Wednesday is going to be polygamy. So please come with your questions on polygamy and Mormonism, whether it has to do with Joseph Smith, D&C 132, polygamy in Utah, or the ends of polygamy. I will try to do my best to answer it, and it should be a lot of fun. And if you want to give back, and I'm so grateful for the many of you who have chosen to give back, and so this channel can sustain, you can become a member, where for a nominal fee, you get early access to the videos, you get a little icon next to your name, and you get the privilege of knowing that you're allowing this channel to continue its outreach on historical topics. All right, that's enough business. Let's get back to the Quorum of the 12. Because Brigham Young came up through the Quorum of the 12, you might assume that he continued to prioritize the Quorum of the 12 in decision-making actions and activities and structures while Brigham Young was president. But many in the Quorum of the 12 came to worry that Brigham Young was hogging too much of the authority. A number of the apostles, like Orson Pratt, felt that Young was now betraying an agreement they felt they had, that the Quorum of the 12 would remain an authoritative body, but Brigham Young was siphoning much away to himself and to the First Presidency. D. Michael Quinn's Extension of Powers volume, the second volume in his Mormon Hierarchy series, digs a lot into these disputes. He even alleges that there are several moments when Brigham Young did not have the Quorum of the 12 sustained as prophets, seers, and revelators due to a dispute. I think Quinn might have been overstating things a bit, but I think the evidence is there. And we also see Brigham Young tinkering with the Quorum of the 12 seniority functions in the 1870s, where he's not quite comfortable with several of the members who have authority and might then succeed himself. Notably, Orson Pratt and Orson Hyde, who Brigham Young had conflicts in the past and who at various points had been excommunicated, but then Joseph Smith restored them to the Quorum of the 12, and Joseph Smith told them that you are restored to your previous positions as if you were never excommunicated. But in the 1870s, Brigham Young restructures the Quorum of the 12, demotes Orson Pratt and Orson Hyde according to their second appointment when they were rejoining the Quorum of the 12 so that they would not succeed, which makes it so John Taylor, instead of Orson Pratt, then succeeds Brigham Young after his death. And those issues, that infighting between the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12, continue even after Brigham Young's death. There's a lot of anxiety over how George Q. Cannon, a member of the First Presidency, was not included, the Quorum of the 12, on discussions, and the 1887 succession crisis was the last of these many disputes. Now, I did an entire video on the 1887 succession crisis, and I recommend going and check it out if you haven't yet. But since that point on, since the Wilford Woodruff era, there seems to be a much clear and better understood and kind relationship between the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency, where the First Presidency lays out the vision and structure, and the Quorum of the 12 then oversees the implementation, and they also oversee the various committees in the church. And that structure has largely remained in place ever since. One of the most colorful figures in Mormon leadership history was J. Golden Kimball, a son of Heber C. Kimball, who you've probably heard a lot of famous folkloric statements associated with him. He was probably not as colorful as all these folklore stories enable, but he did have some great zingers. One of my favorite folkloric statements connected to Kimball was that whenever church leaders appoint new apostles or other figures, most are called by revelation, some are called by inspiration, but he says, I reckon many are called by relation, meaning relationships and familial connections. And that has a ring of truth for it, especially during the era that J. Golden Kimball lived. Because between, say, 1880 and 1920, the Quorum of the 12 is really dominated by these dynastic families, and where most of the new appointments are taken from those apostolic lineages. There's a belief that those families from those children from elite families are coming from chosen lineages, as well as the benefactors of righteous upbringings. Prophets also saw this as a chance to extend their family's legacy within church leadership. If you were to select one of your sons as an apostle while they were very young, chances are they would outlive everyone ahead of them, because when you are called to an apostle, you are placed on this escalator to the church presidency if you just outlive everyone in front of you. Brigham Young ordained several of his sons as apostles without adding them to the Quorum of the 12, which caused a bit of friction, especially around 1900, maybe a story for another day. But even after Brigham Young, you see this happening. John Taylor, when he became prophet, one of the first apostolic appointments he made was his son, John W. Taylor, who was only 26 years old. Wilford Woodruff, one of his first apostolic appointments, was Abraham Woodruff, his son, at 25 years old. And Joseph F. Smith, one of his first apostolic appointments, was his son, Hiram Mack Smith, at 29 years old. So all three of those prophets, one of the first things they did when they became prophet was appointing one of their young sons into the apostleship, which seems to determine that they would live long enough to become president. But jokes on them. One of those sons was excommunicated, John W. Taylor, whole story that I've covered elsewhere. And then the other two, Abraham Woodruff and Hiram Mack Smith, actually died at young ages. But we do get basically a quorum of Nepo apostles between 1890 and 1920. The Quorum of the 12 included the following individuals who had either apostolic fathers or grandfathers: Joseph F. Smith, Brigham Young Jr., Francis Lyman, John Henry Smith, John W. Taylor, Abraham Cannon, Abraham Woodruff, Hiram Mack Smith, George Albert Smith, George F. Richards, Orson F. Whitney, and Joseph Fielding Smith. Here is one image from the Quorum of the 12 in 1898, and all but I think 2 or 3 of the apostles who are shown here had either apostolic fathers or grandfathers. In other words, J. Golden Kimball was onto something. You even get several dynamics of multi-generational apostles. One of these connections that I really find interesting is the Lymans, Amasa Lyman, Francis Lyman, Richard Lyman, the oldest and the youngest of which were excommunicated from the Quorum of the 12. The middle one becomes president of the Quorum of the 12. Or you have the Royal Smith family, whereas between 1835 and 2023, there are only 25 years in which the Quorum of the 12 did not feature a descendant of Joseph Smith Sr. You had William Smith in the original Quorum of the 12, then you have Joseph F. Smith a couple decades later, who then puts in Hiram Mack Smith as well as Joseph Fielding Smith, his sons, and then M. Russell Ballard, who's also a descendant of Hiram Smith. But we also see a decline of these dynastic appointments. They don't disappear, but they aren't as frequent as they used to be. Even J. Golden Kimball, in his family, would come to regret that he himself and several of his siblings weren't called to the Quorum of the 12 as they thought was their birthright. Because now, once the church is becoming much larger and much global, there are other dynamics at play with these apostolic appointments. So let's dig into some of these trends and dynamics for apostolic callings. And I should say from the outset that faithful members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints do believe these apostles are called by revelation and that these people are who God wants appointed to those positions. And I'm not denying that inspiration, but as a scholar from the outside, I have to place on these contextual dynamics that are quite clear. Most particularly, the apostolic callings become largely routinized, meaning they follow typical pattern. There is a move away from, in the old day, of theologians toward more businessmen or people with legal backgrounds or people with leadership values that are skills that are going to transfer directly, not to writing theological treatises, but to overseeing a global bureaucracy. You need these types of skills and backgrounds to oversee the type of work that the church now engages in. More recently, you do see some movement toward demographic diversity among the Quorum of the 12, especially as it's becoming much more global, something that is a bit delayed, but I imagine will increase. There's also a clear ecclesiastical ladder. Those called to the Quorum of the 12 largely come from one of two backgrounds at this point. They either serve in the presidency of the 70 is the ecclesiastical step just below the Quorum of the 12, or from the presiding bishopric, which is also a high position overseeing a church-wide measure. So most apostles come from one of those two backgrounds. They're usually nowadays in their 60s with a few exceptions. There have been some surprises, not as big a surprise. I think the last major surprise was Thomas S. Monson being called to the Quorum of the 12 at the age of 32, stories that many Latter-day Saints had heard, at least when I was growing up. More recently, the biggest surprise might have been Dieter Uchtdorf, who, though serving in many leadership callings, I think it's fair to say is not cut from the same type of cloth as many LDS leaders, the way he speaks, the circles he runs in, and there's plenty of reports that show that he does not really fit into the broader church hierarchy, which I don't think is a bad thing. On the young end of apostolic appointments, the only person who falls out of the typical realm was David Bednar, who was called at the age of 52, which if you look at these, predictions based on ages, seems to imply that he's not just going to become the LDS president at some point, but have an extended presidency. But let's look at the last two presidents before Dallin H. So see some trends. So you had Thomas S. Monson, who called 4 apostles to the Quorum of the 12, all of whom had some connections to Salt Lake City's East Bench, which shows that Thomas S. Monson basically went with who he was comfortable with, which might be connected to his health and at the time of his presidency. Neil Anderson, Ronald Rasband, Gary Stevenson, Dale Renlund. They are definitely fitting into a particular type. Then you had Russell M. Nelson. During Nelson's presidency, he called 3 men to the Quorum of the 12, one of whom was the first Chinese-American, Garrett Gong. The other 2 were international, Ulysses Soares and Patrick Kieran. Russell M. Nelson, for whatever else you want to say about him, did more to globalize and diversify the Quorum of the 12 than any other president up until this point. Now, Oakes has only been president for less than a year at this point. His first apostolic call was Gerald Cosset, who was from the presiding bishopric, so that fits the common leadership ladder. He was also well liked by many people. I have not had any interactions with Cosset, but I've heard many good things. In fact, I'll give one anecdote. Shortly after Nelson died and Oakes ascended, I was being interviewed by a journalist from France for one of their leading newspapers. And I mentioned that Cosset was one of the potential candidates being called to the Quorum of the 12. And this journalist lit up, not just because it would be a French person, But because apparently Cossé has been the media outreach to a lot of the French newspapers, and they love Cossé. They found him very moderate, they found him very modern, eloquent, sympathetic, so they gave him thumbs up, which I was glad to hear. On the other hand, Cossé does not really match much of the demographic growth in America because the white European congregations are mostly in decline at this point. But given his Francophone background and skills, it probably means he can at least speak to West Africa, which is one of the largest increasing areas in the church. So what is on Oakes's mind as he's currently ruminating on the apostolic call whenever it gets decided? Well, he could choose to call another international apostle, especially someone who represents some of the regions where the church is experiencing most of its gains, like Africa. So he might call someone like Edouard Dubé. He could fulfill the long-standing LDS tradition of more dynastic callings of people staying within the family, and he could call someone like Matthew Holland, who is the son of Jeffrey R. Holland, and they might see that as poetic, especially given how far back Oakes and Holland go. He could call someone who represents a period of retrenchment, and one of the bulldogs that you see in church leadership pushing these more conservative elements might be someone like Clark Gilbert, current super advisor of church education, who is pushing the retrenchment at BYU and other church institutions. Or you might see Oakes calling the first African-American apostle someone like Peter Johnson. Whoever it is, this person will then be placed on this escalator that leads to the presidency so long as they outlive those ahead of them. And in the short run, they're going to be comprising the quorum that makes some very important decisions for the church. So I hope this video made sense. I tried to touch on some of the historical significance and evolution of this position. I probably missed a lot. Let me know what dynamic you think I missed. If you were a gambler, let me know who you would wager on for Oakes's calling. And I hope this is further testament of why history continues to be relevant. And as we're looking at these contemporary decisions that are going to shape the future, we also need to consider the past that brought us to this point.